Captain Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of the Galactic Defense Station, feeling the vibrations of massive engines humming through the structure. Around her, alien warriors towered like living monuments to destruction. The Chitauri stood 8 feet tall with chitinous armor naturally grown from their exoskeletons. The Vorthak possessed 4 arms, each capable of crushing steel with casual ease. The reptilian Zephyrians moved with predatory grace, their scales shifting colors to match their surroundings. Elena stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighing barely 140 pounds. Her bones were hollow compared to the dense mineral structures of her fellow warriors. Her skin could be punctured by simple projectiles that would bounce harmlessly off her companions. Yet here she stood in the most elite fighting force in the known galaxy. The briefing room buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages, but Elena caught the familiar undertones of doubt. The Chitauri commander Thex-9 clicked his mandibles in what she recognized as disapproval. His compound eyes fixed on her with the intensity of a scanning device. "The human should remain on the ship," Thex-9 announced to the gathering. "This mission requires warriors who can withstand plasma fire and kinetic impacts. She will break like dried vegetation in the first engagement." Several aliens nodded in agreement. The Vorthak squad leader, Graxon, flexed his 4 massive arms. "I have seen human anatomy reports. Their bones snap under pressures we consider gentle touches. Their organs fail when exposed to radiation levels we find comfortable. Why does Command continue this experiment?" Elena had heard these arguments countless times over her 3 years of service. Every mission began with the same debate about her fragility. The statistics supported their concerns. Humans possessed the lowest physical durability ratings of any species in the Galactic Defense Force. Their strength output ranked in the bottom 5%. Their natural armor consisted of thin skin that provided virtually no protection. Yet Elena's service record contained achievements that puzzled her fellow warriors. She had completed missions that claimed the lives of supposedly superior fighters. Her survival rate exceeded the average for warriors with 10 times her physical capabilities. The contradiction frustrated military analysts across the galaxy. Commander Zek Alpha, a crystalline being whose body resembled living diamond, materialized at the front of the room. His voice resonated through harmonic frequencies that translated into every language simultaneously. "The mission parameters are simple," Zek Alpha announced. "A destroyer-class vessel has crash-landed on the planet Cathera 7. The ship contains classified weapons technology that cannot fall into Syndicate hands. The terrain is hostile. The environment will test every warrior present. We have 48 hours before Syndicate reinforcements arrive." Elena studied the planetary data scrolling across the holographic display. Cathera 7 featured extreme temperature variations, corrosive atmospheric conditions, and gravitational anomalies that would challenge even the most robust physiology. The crashed ship lay in a region marked with radiation warnings and geological instability. "Squad assignments are final," Zek Alpha continued. "Each team will approach the crash site from different vectors. The human will accompany Squad 7 under Thex-9's command." Thex-9's mandibles clicked rapidly in agitation. "Commander, I request reassignment of the human to support duties. My squad cannot succeed while protecting fragile personnel." Elena stepped forward before Zek Alpha could respond. "With respect, sir, I don't require protection. My record speaks for itself." Graxon's forearms crossed in a gesture of dismissal. "Your record shows luck, not skill. Eventually, probability will correct itself. You will die, and warriors will die trying to save you." The tension in the room crystallized around Elena's small frame. She faced beings who could literally tear her apart with their bare hands, yet she felt no fear. Fear had been surgically removed from her emotional responses during years of facing impossible odds. "I understand your concerns," Elena said calmly. "You see weakness where you expect strength. You measure worth by density of bone and thickness of hide. But consider this. Every mission I've completed has succeeded. Every warrior I've fought beside has returned home. Perhaps fragility isn't the liability you assume it to be." The room fell silent except for the ambient hum of life support systems. Elena had spoken a truth that none of them wanted to acknowledge. Despite their superior physical capabilities, their survival rates didn't exceed hers. Something about human physiology, or human psychology, or human methods created results that defied logical analysis. Zek Alpha's crystalline form pulsed with soft light as he processed the debate. "The assignments remain unchanged. Squad 7 will consist of Thex 9, Graxon, Warrior Veltoth, and Captain Vasquez. Deployment begins in 1 standard hour. As the briefing dissolved into preparation activities, Elena found herself surrounded by skeptical glances and worried whispers. The Zephyrian scout Veltoth approached with characteristic directness. "Human Elena," Veltoth said, his scales shifting to concerned blue patterns. "I have studied your species extensively. Your physical limitations are not matters of opinion, but measurable facts. How do you consistently achieve results that should be impossible?" Elena considered the question while checking her equipment harness. Her gear weighed a fraction of what her companions carried, not because she needed less protection, but because she couldn't bear the weight of heavier armor. Her weapons were smaller, with lower power outputs designed for human strength limitations. "Maybe," Elena said thoughtfully, "fragility isn't always a weakness. Maybe sometimes it's a different kind of strength." Veltoth's scales shifted to puzzled yellow. "Explain this paradox." Elena sealed the last equipment pouch and faced the alien warrior. "You'll see on Cathera 7. If we survive long enough, you'll understand what humans mean when we refuse to quit." The transport bay alarms began sounding, signaling final preparations for deployment. Elena moved toward her squad's designated shuttle, aware of the eyes tracking her movement. In a few hours, she would either prove her worth once again, or become another casualty statistic in the Galactic Defense Force records. Either way, she intended to show these warriors exactly what human fragility could accomplish when pushed beyond every reasonable limit. The shuttle descended through Cathara 7's turbulent atmosphere, like a falling stone wrapped in fire. Elena gripped her restraint harness as the craft bucked and twisted against atmospheric resistance that would have crushed civilian vessels. Around her, her squad mates showed varying degrees of confidence in their survival. Thex 9's chitinous exterior remained perfectly still, his natural armor designed to withstand impacts that would pulverize human bones. Graxon's 4 massive arms flexed rhythmically, each movement demonstrating strength that exceeded Elena's entire body mass. Veltoth's scales had shifted to adaptive camouflage patterns, already preparing for planetary conditions. Elena felt every vibration of the struggling engines through her inadequately protected skeleton. Her human physiology registered each atmospheric pressure change as her body fought to maintain equilibrium. Where her companions experienced minor discomfort, she endured genuine pain that she carefully concealed behind a mask of professional composure. The shuttle's pilot, a mechanical construct designated Pilot 7, announced their approach. "Landing zone compromised by electromagnetic interference. Sensors detecting gravitational anomalies and radiation spikes. Recommend immediate deployment upon touchdown." Through the observation ports, Elena glimpsed their destination. Cathera 7's surface resembled a war zone designed by nightmare architects. Crystalline formations jutted from poisoned earth like broken teeth. Electrical storms raged perpetually across skies the color of infected wounds. The crashed destroyer ship lay twisted among rocky spires, its hull breached in dozens of places. The shuttle touched down with a violent impact that rattled Elena's teeth. Her companions absorbed the shock through their superior bone density and muscle mass. Elena felt the landing in every joint and vertebra, but she released her restraints and moved toward the exit with fluid efficiency. "Environmental suits are mandatory," Pilot 7 announced. "Atmospheric composition will prove lethal to most species within minutes of exposure." Elena sealed her lightweight environmental suit, knowing it provided minimal protection compared to the heavy-duty armor her squad mates wore. Her suit weighed 30 pounds fully loaded. Thex 9's armor system weighed over 200 pounds and could withstand direct plasma cannon hits. The disparity seemed almost comical. As they prepared to disembark, Graxon addressed the obvious concern. "The human suit will fail first under these conditions. When it does, who carries her back to the shuttle?" Elena checked her weapon systems and survival gear. "My suit won't fail because I won't let it fail. Simple as that." Veltoth's scales displayed skeptical orange patterns. "Environmental systems are not subject to willpower. Human Elena. Physics cannot be overcome through determination." The shuttle's rear hatch opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing Cathera 7 in all its hostile glory. Immediately, Elena's suit alarms began registering dangerous radiation levels, corrosive atmospheric elements, and temperature fluctuations that ranged from freezing to scalding within seconds. Thex-9 led the squad out onto the planet's surface with confident strides. His natural armor deflected environmental hazards that would have killed unprotected humans instantly. Graxon followed, his forearms easily managing equipment loads that would require vehicles for human transport. Veltoth moved with predatory grace, his scales automatically adjusting to provide optimal protection against each new threat. Elena stepped onto Cathera 7 and immediately understood why her companions considered her presence a liability. The planet's hostility pressed against her environmental suit like hungry predators testing for weaknesses. Her radiation sensors climbed toward dangerous levels. Her suit's cooling system strained to maintain survivable internal temperatures. Yet as they moved across the treacherous terrain toward the crash site, Elena noticed something her companions had missed. The gravitational anomalies that forced the larger aliens to adjust their movements constantly had minimal effect on her lighter frame. The unstable ground that threatened to collapse under their combined weight supported her easily. Radiation levels increasing, Veltoth reported. Estimate 15 minutes before protective equipment begins degrading. Elena checked her readings and found similar warnings flashing across her display. Her suit would indeed fail soon under these conditions. But she had learned something about survival that her physically superior companions had never needed to understand. There, she said, pointing toward a formation of crystalline structures near the crash site. Those crystals are deflecting radiation in specific patterns. If we move along that ridgeline, we can use them as natural shielding. Thex-9's compound eyes examined the area Elena indicated. The path is too narrow for safe passage. One misstep means falling into those energy discharges below. Elena was already moving toward the crystal ridge. It's not too narrow for me. What happened next demonstrated the fundamental difference between human fragility and alien durability. Elena's lightweight frame and precise movements allowed her to navigate the narrow crystal ridge with confidence. Her smaller size meant she could use handholds and footing that wouldn't support her companion's mass. Graxon attempted to follow, and immediately discovered the problem. His 4 massive arms and dense muscle structure made him too heavy for the crystal formations. Each step threatened to shatter the structures that easily supported Elena's weight. "This is impossible," Graxon declared after nearly falling into an energy discharge. "The formations won't hold us." Elena paused on the ridge and looked back at her squad. For the first time since joining the Galactic Defense Force, she saw something new in their expressions. They weren't looking at her with pity or condescension. They were looking at her with something that might have been respect. "Follow my exact path," Elena called back. "Step only where I stepped. Use the handholds I used. Don't rely on strength. Rely on precision." Slowly, carefully, the 3 alien warriors followed Elena across the crystal ridge. Each step required them to suppress their natural instincts to use brute force and overwhelming power. Instead, they had to move with the delicate precision that Elena's fragile human physiology demanded every moment of every day. By the time they reached the other side, their radiation exposure had been cut in half. Elena's supposedly inferior survival equipment was functioning perfectly, while their heavy-duty systems showed stress indicators from the extended environmental exposure. Thex-9 studied Elena with new attention. "Your movement patterns are efficient." Elena checked her tactical display as they approached the crash destroyer ship. When you can't survive mistakes, you learn not to make them. When you can't overpower problems, you learn to solve them. That's what fragility teaches. The crashed ship loomed before them, its twisted hull promising new dangers and challenges. Elena knew her environmental suit would continue degrading under the planet's assault. She knew her weapons and equipment were inferior to her companion's gear. She knew that by every logical measure, she was the weakest member of the squad. But for the first time, she sensed that her companions were beginning to understand that weakness and fragility weren't always the same thing. The interior of the crashed destroyer ship resembled a tomb designed by insane engineers. Emergency lighting cast sickly red shadows across twisted corridors where bulkheads had been compressed into impossible angles. Electrical systems sparked intermittently, creating dancing patterns of light and darkness that played tricks on perception. Elena's squad moved through the wreckage with weapons ready, but the ship's layout challenged their assumptions about tactical movement. Passages that should have accommodated their large frames had been crushed down to narrow spaces, barely wide enough for human passage. Structural debris blocked routes that would normally provide clear fields of fire. X9 attempted to force his way through a collapsed doorway using his natural strength. His chitinous frame scraped against twisted metal with sounds like grinding machinery. After several minutes of effort, he was forced to retreat. "The structural damage is too severe," he reported. "Standard penetration techniques are ineffective." Elena examined the same doorway from a different perspective. Her smaller frame allowed her to see gaps and spaces that her companions couldn't perceive. Where they saw impassable barriers, she identified potential routes. "There's a maintenance crawlway above the debris," she said, pointing to an opening barely visible in the shadows. "It connects to the corridor beyond." Graxon looked at the narrow space with obvious skepticism. "That passage might accommodate your frame, but it's useless for real warriors. We need routes that allow proper combat positioning." Elena was already climbing toward the maintenance access. Sometimes the route that works is more important than the route that's comfortable. As she disappeared into the narrow crawlway, her squad mates faced an uncomfortable choice. They could attempt to find alternative passages through the wreckage, which might take hours they didn't have, or they could follow Elena's lead and abandon their preferred tactical approaches. Elena's voice echoed from somewhere inside the ship's structure. "The crawlway opens into a central junction. I can see the main data core from here, but there's a problem." X9 positioned himself below the maintenance access. "Report." Elena's response carried tension that hadn't been present in her voice before. "The core chamber is flooded with coolant gas. Toxic to most species, but the concentration isn't lethal to humans yet. I can reach the data terminals, but you'll need to find another way in." Veltoth's scales shifted to alarmed yellow patterns. "The human is proposing to enter a contaminated environment alone. This violates all tactical protocols." Elena's response demonstrated a fundamental difference in how humans and aliens approached survival calculations. "My environmental suit can handle the contamination for approximately 12 minutes. That's enough time to access the data core and download the classified information. Your suits would fail in half that time due to their different filtration systems." Graxon's forearms gestured in frustration. "Even if you survive the contamination, you'll be isolated and unsupported. If Syndicate forces arrive during the operation, you'll be trapped with no backup." Elena had already begun moving through the maintenance system toward the core chamber. "Then don't let Syndicate forces arrive. Guard the perimeter and keep the exit routes clear. I'll handle the data extraction." What happened next challenged every assumption the alien warriors held about human capabilities. Elena emerged from the maintenance system into the core chamber, where poisonous gases swirled in patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't potentially lethal. Her environmental suit immediately began registering contamination warnings. But the lightweight human system proved more adaptable than the heavy alien equivalents. Where their suits were designed to resist contamination through brute force filtering, her suit was designed to adapt and compensate for environmental challenges. Elena moved through the toxic atmosphere with careful efficiency, reaching the data terminals while her suit systems fought to maintain safe internal conditions. Her hands worked across control interfaces designed for alien physiology, but human adaptability allowed her to manipulate systems originally intended for species, with different sensory and motor capabilities. Through her suit's communication system, she could hear her squad mates establishing defensive positions around the ship's exterior. X9's tactical updates painted a picture of approaching danger. "Syndicate reconnaissance drones detected at grid reference 77 Alpha, he reported. "Estimate 20 minutes before advance forces arrive." Elena's fingers moved faster across the alien control systems. Human neural plasticity allowed her to recognize patterns and adapt to unfamiliar interfaces more quickly than species with more rigid cognitive structures. Where aliens saw incomprehensible symbols, she identified logical sequences and operational protocols. "Data extraction at 60% completion," she reported, "but the contamination levels are rising faster than expected." Veltoth's voice carried genuine concern. "Human Elena, your suit telemetry shows critical stress indicators. You should abort the mission." Elena continued working as toxic gases swirled around her like hungry ghosts. Aborting means the Syndicate gets the weapons technology. That's not acceptable. Graxon's response revealed something new in his understanding of human psychology. Your species prioritizes mission completion over individual survival. This explains your impossible success rates. Elena's environmental suit alarms began sounding continuous warnings as contamination levels pushed beyond safe parameters. Her human physiology was being challenged at the cellular level, but she had learned something about endurance that her physically superior companions couldn't comprehend. "Data extraction at 90%, she announced. "I can finish this." Through her failing suit systems, she could hear the sounds of Syndicate forces beginning their assault on the ship's perimeter. Plasma weapon discharges echoed through the corridors as her squad mates engaged the enemy. Every instinct demanded that she abandon her mission and support her companions. Instead, Elena pushed her contaminated human body beyond its safe operational limits and completed the data extraction. As the final files transferred to her storage device, her environmental suit finally succumbed to the toxic atmosphere. Elena found herself breathing poison and somehow continuing to function. Her human physiology, which everyone considered hopelessly fragile, demonstrated an adaptability that amazed even her. Where alien systems failed catastrophically when pushed beyond design parameters, human biology found ways to continue operating under impossible conditions. She made it back to the maintenance crawlway as her vision began to blur from contamination exposure. Behind her, the core chamber's toxic gases continued swirling in patterns that would have killed any of her companions within seconds. Elena had succeeded where stronger, more durable warriors would have failed. Her fragility had become a form of strength that none of them had recognized before this moment. Elena crawled through the maintenance system with failing vision and burning lungs, her human body fighting to process toxins that would have killed most species instantly. Behind her, the sounds of combat echoed through the ship's twisted corridors as her squad mates engaged Syndicate forces. She emerged from the crawlway into a scene of controlled chaos. Thex-9 had positioned himself at a choke point where his chitinous armor could deflect incoming plasma fire. Graxon used his 4 massive arms to manipulate heavy debris as improvised cover, while returning fire with devastating accuracy. Veltoth moved through the shadows like liquid death, his adaptive camouflage making him nearly invisible to enemy targeting systems. The Syndicate forces had arrived in greater numbers than intelligence reports had predicted. Elena counted at least 12 hostiles moving through the ship's interior, their advanced weaponry designed specifically to counter Galactic Defense Force tactics. "Elena," Thex-9 called out without turning from his firing position. "Status report." Elena checked her equipment as her poisoned system struggled to maintain consciousness. "Data extraction complete. All classified information secured. But we have a problem." Graxon's 4 arms continued manipulating his weapon systems with mechanical precision. "The problem is obvious. We're outnumbered 3-1 and trapped in a compromised position." Elena studied the tactical situation with human analytical capabilities that functioned differently from alien logic systems. Where her companions saw the combat as a straightforward defensive engagement, she recognized patterns and possibilities that their more rigid thinking patterns had missed. "The Syndicate forces are using standard assault formations," she observed. "They expect us to fight like conventional warriors." Veltoth's scales shifted to confused purple. "We are conventional warriors. How else would we fight?" Elena moved toward a section of collapsed bulkhead that her squad mates had dismissed as impassable. They're not expecting human tactics. What Elena understood, and her companions were beginning to learn, was that human combat doctrine had evolved from millennia of being the physically weakest predators on their home planet. Where aliens had developed fighting styles based on superior strength, armor, or natural weapons, humans had learned to win through unpredictability, adaptation, and sheer stubborn refusal to acknowledge defeat. Elena slipped through a gap in the debris that wouldn't accommodate her companions' larger frames. Her lightweight human construction allowed her to move through spaces that the Syndicate forces had dismissed as irrelevant to the tactical situation. "Elena, report your position," Thex-9 demanded as plasma fire continued to streak through the corridors. Elena's voice came from an unexpected direction, somewhere above the combat zone. "I'm repositioning for a flanking maneuver. Keep them focused on your position for 30 seconds. Graxon's response carried the frustration of a warrior trained for direct confrontation. Flanking maneuvers require numerical superiority or overwhelming firepower. You possess neither. Elena had found her way into the ship's environmental system, where human-sized passages allowed her to move undetected above the battlefield. Her smaller weapons and lighter equipment, which her companions considered inferior, proved perfectly suited for operations in confined spaces. Flanking maneuvers require surprise, Elena corrected. Everything else is negotiable. The Syndicate forces had positioned themselves in a classic defensive formation, using their superior numbers and firepower to pin down Elena's squad while advancing methodically through the ship's corridors. Their tactics were sound, their equipment was superior, and their strategic position was nearly unassailable. Elena dropped through a ceiling access port, directly behind their command position. What happened next demonstrated why human warriors had earned their reputation for achieving impossible victories. Elena's fragile human physiology allowed her to fall silently through spaces where heavier warriors would have crashed through with obvious noise. Her lightweight weapons fired projectiles that were specifically designed for precision rather than raw power. Elena eliminated 3 Syndicate soldiers before their companions realized they were under attack. From an impossible direction, her human reflexes, evolved for survival in environments where everything was bigger and stronger, allowed her to process target acquisition and threat assessment faster than aliens who had never needed such capabilities. The Syndicate formation collapsed into chaos as they attempted to respond to attacks, coming from above, behind, and below simultaneously. Elena moved through their position like smoke, never remaining in one location long enough for return fire to be effective. Impossible, Veltoth whispered, as Elena's tactics destroyed an enemy force that should have overwhelmed the entire squad. How does she move like that? Thex 9 began to understand something about human evolution that military analysts had missed. Her species developed in an environment where survival required defeating superior opponents. Every human tactical instinct is designed for overcoming greater strength through superior strategy. Elena's voice echoed from somewhere in the ship's structure as Syndicate forces attempted to reorganize their disrupted formation. Humans learned a long time ago that the strongest warrior doesn't always win the fight. Sometimes the warrior who refuses to quit wins the fight. The remaining Syndicate forces found themselves trapped between Elena's unpredictable assault and her squad mates' overwhelming defensive fire. Graxon's forearms delivered devastating salvos, while Thex 9's natural armor allowed him to advance through return fire that would have stopped conventional forces. Within minutes, the Syndicate assault had been completely neutralized. Elena emerged from the ship's environmental system, with her mission data intact and her squad unharmed, despite facing odds that should have resulted in total casualties. As they prepared to evacuate the crash site, Veltoth approached Elena with scales displaying respectful blue patterns. "Human Elena, I must ask a question that troubles my understanding." Elena checked her equipment as they moved toward the extraction point. "Ask away." Veltoth's scales shifted to puzzled yellow. "Your physical capabilities are measurably inferior to ours. Your equipment is lighter and less powerful. Your armor provides minimal protection. Yet you consistently achieve results that we cannot match. How do you reconcile this contradiction?" Elena paused at the ship's exit and looked back at the scene of their victory. "Maybe the contradiction is in how you define strength. Maybe being fragile teaches you things that being indestructible never could." Thex 9's compound eyes studied Elena with new respect. "What things?" Elena stepped out into Kithara 7's hostile environment, where her inferior environmental suit would have to protect her fragile human physiology for the journey back to their shuttle. "How to win when winning should be impossible," she said simply. "How to survive when survival makes no sense. How to keep fighting when logic says you should quit." As they began their trek across the dangerous planetary surface, Elena's companions finally began to understand why the Galactic Defense Force continued to recruit humans, despite their obvious physical limitations. Fragility, they were learning, was not always a weakness. Sometimes it was a different kind of strength that could achieve victories that raw power could never accomplish. The journey back to their extraction shuttle became a masterclass in human survival philosophy. Elena's environmental suit, which had seemed inadequately protected compared to her companion's heavy armor, began demonstrating adaptive capabilities that surprised everyone. As they crossed Kithara 7's treacherous terrain, Elena's suit automatically adjusted its filtration systems to compensate for the toxic exposure she had endured in the ship's core chamber. Where alien environmental protection relied on brute force resistance to hostile conditions, human technology emphasized flexibility and adaptation. Thex-9 monitored his squad's status as they navigated between crystalline formations that sparked with dangerous electrical discharges. Elena, your suit telemetry shows contamination levels that should have caused system failure. Elena moved carefully around a formation of unstable crystals that towered above their small group. Human engineering philosophy is different. We design equipment to adapt and compensate rather than simply resist. When you can't overpower a problem, you learn to work around it. Graxon struggled with the concept as his 4 massive arms helped him maintain balance on the shifting ground. But adaptation requires accepting weakness. Superior engineering eliminates weaknesses entirely. Elena paused to help Veltoth navigate a section where his natural camouflage abilities were being disrupted by electromagnetic interference. Superior engineering accounts for the fact that you can't eliminate every weakness. Sometimes you have to turn weakness into strength. As they continued across the hostile landscape, Elena's companions began noticing details they had missed during their initial advance. Elena moved across unstable ground with a fluid grace that seemed to anticipate geological shifts before they occurred. Her lighter weight allowed her to use handholds and footing that wouldn't support their mass, but more importantly, her movement patterns revealed an intuitive understanding of environmental dynamics. How do you predict the ground instability? Veltoth asked as Elena guided them around a section that looked stable, but proved treacherous when tested. Elena checked her scanner readings against her own sensory observations. Human survival instincts evolved on a planet where everything was trying to kill us. We learned to read environmental cues that other species never needed to notice. Thex-9's compound eyes tracked Elena's movement patterns as she navigated obstacles that had challenged him during their initial advance. Your species developed enhanced threat perception as compensation for physical vulnerability. Elena led them across another section of Crystal Ridge, her precise movements creating a safe path that her companions could follow. Every human child learns to recognize danger signs that might not register to species with natural armor or overwhelming strength. When a broken bone means death, you learn not to break bones. The extraction shuttle came into view across a final stretch of open ground, dotted with energy discharges and radiation pools. Elena's environmental suit was now operating well beyond its intended parameters. Her human physiology pushed to limits that would have killed most species hours ago. Graxon studied the final approach with tactical concern. The energy discharges are increasing in frequency. My armor can withstand direct hits, but the accumulated exposure will eventually overwhelm even superior protection. Elena analyzed the same terrain with human pattern recognition capabilities. The discharges follow predictable sequences. If we time our movement properly, we can cross between the energy pulses. Veltoth's scales shifted to skeptical orange. The timing requirements would demand precision beyond normal capabilities. One miscalculation means instant death. Elena was already moving toward the danger zone. Then we don't miscalculate. What followed demonstrated the fundamental difference between alien approaches to danger and human approaches to survival. Elena's companions relied on their superior durability to survive environmental hazards through brute resistance. Elena relied on precise timing, careful observation, and calculated risk-taking to avoid dangers entirely. She crossed the energy discharge field like a dancer moving through laser light. Her movements synchronized with patterns that her companions couldn't perceive. Each step was placed with absolute precision. Each pause timed to avoid deadly energy pulses by fractions of seconds. Thex-9 attempted to follow Elena's path and immediately discovered why her approach worked, where his would fail. His heavier frame created different ground pressure patterns that triggered energy discharges at unexpected intervals. His natural armor protected him from the initial hits, but Elena's method of avoiding damage entirely proved more effective than his method of surviving damage. I understand now, Thex-9 said as Elena guided him through the field with human precision. Your tactics are not based on surviving punishment. They are based on avoiding punishment entirely. Elena reached the shuttle's boarding ramp and turned to assist her companion's final approach. Humans learned early that the best armor is not getting hit in the first place. As they secured themselves aboard the extraction shuttle, Elena's squad mates found themselves reassessing everything they thought they knew about combat effectiveness and survival capability. Elena's environmental suit was failing, her weapons were depleted, and her human physiology showed stress indicators that would have hospitalized warriors from more durable species. Yet she had completed a mission that challenged every member of the squad, survived environmental conditions that pushed all of them to their limits, and demonstrated tactical capabilities that none of them could replicate. Veltoth's scales displayed contemplative blue patterns as the shuttle lifted off from Kythera 7's hostile surface. Human Elena, I believe I am beginning to understand why your species has achieved such remarkable success in the Galactic Defense Force. Elena checked her mission data one final time as they climbed toward orbit. Care to share your conclusion? Veltoth's response carried the weight of a fundamental shift in understanding. You do not succeed despite your fragility. You succeed because of it. Your physical limitations forced your species to develop capabilities that we never needed to learn. Graxon flexed his 4 massive arms in a gesture that now seemed less impressive than it had hours earlier. We relied on strength and durability. You developed intelligence and adaptability. Elena settled back in her restraint harness as Kythera 7 disappeared below them. Maybe that's what the galaxy needs right now. Maybe the challenges we're facing require solutions that can't be solved with bigger armor or stronger weapons. Thex9's mandibles clicked in what Elena had learned to recognize as thoughtful consideration. Perhaps the military analysts have been measuring the wrong variables when evaluating human effectiveness. Elena smiled as her failing environmental suit finally gave up its struggle to maintain safe internal conditions. Perhaps fragility is just another word for adaptation, and adaptation might be the strongest survival trait in the universe. As their shuttle climbed toward the waiting command ship, Elena's companions found themselves looking at their human squad mate with an entirely new understanding of what it meant to be a warrior in the Galactic Defense Force. The debriefing chamber aboard the Galactic Defense Station hummed with tension as Elena's squad prepared to present their mission results. Commander Zek Alpha's crystalline form pulsed with analytical light while reviewing preliminary reports from their Kythera 7 operation. Elena sat in her standard-issue chair, her human frame dwarfed by the massive seats designed for larger alien physiology. Her environmental suit had been replaced with clean-duty uniforms, but the medical scanner readings from her exposure to Kythera 7's toxic atmosphere still flickered across monitoring displays. Around the chamber, senior officers from various species observed the debriefing with interest that bordered on scientific curiosity. The mission had achieved complete success against impossible odds, but the methods used challenged established military doctrine in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. Commander Zek Alpha's harmonic voice resonated through the chamber's translation systems. Squad 7 accomplished objectives that 3 previous teams failed to achieve. The classified data has been recovered, syndicate forces have been neutralized, and all personnel returned safely. However, the tactical reports contain inconsistencies that require explanation. Thex9 stepped forward, his chitinous armor bearing scorch marks from plasma fire. Commander, the inconsistencies arise from human tactical methods that do not conform to standard military analysis. General Morthok, a massive warrior whose species had conquered 17 star systems through superior firepower, leaned forward in his oversized chair. Explain these methods, squad leader. How did 4 warriors defeat a syndicate force that eliminated 12 of our best fighters? Elena watched as her squad mates struggled to articulate what they had witnessed. Their experiences on Kythera 7 had challenged fundamental assumptions about combat effectiveness that their species had held for millennia. Graxon spoke first, his forearms gesturing as he attempted to describe tactical concepts that didn't exist in alien military doctrine. The human employed strategies based on avoiding damage rather than absorbing it. Her movement patterns prioritized precision over power. She achieved objectives through methods that appeared to violate logical tactical principles. Veltoth's scales shifted to respectful blue as he addressed the assembly. Human Elena demonstrated capabilities that our standard effectiveness measurements cannot properly evaluate. Her physical limitations forced her to develop solutions that we would never have considered. Commander Zek Alpha's crystalline structure pulsed with puzzled light frequencies. Elaborate on these solutions, Warrior Veltoth. Elena recognized that her companions were struggling to explain concepts that made perfect sense to human psychology, but challenged alien thinking patterns. She stood and addressed the assembly directly. With permission, Commander, I can explain the tactical principles that confused my squad mates. General Morthak's massive form shifted with obvious skepticism. You claim superior tactical understanding to warriors with centuries of combat experience? Elena faced the general without intimidation, her fragile human frame standing before beings who could crush her without effort. I claim different tactical understanding, General. Human combat doctrine evolved from different pressures than yours. She moved to the chamber's holographic display system and began projecting tactical diagrams that illustrated human military philosophy. Every species in this room developed fighting techniques based on their natural advantages. You used superior strength, natural armor, enhanced sensory capabilities, or overwhelming firepower. The display showed comparative analysis of various species combat approaches, each emphasizing their particular evolutionary advantages. Elena's presentation revealed patterns that the assembled officers had never considered. Humans had no natural advantages, Elena continued. We were weaker, slower, and more fragile than every predator on our planet. Our survival required developing tactics that could defeat superior opponents through methods that didn't rely on physical superiority. General Morthak's skepticism remained evident. Such methods would be inherently inferior to tactics based on actual strength. Elena's response demonstrated the fundamental difference between human and alien military thinking. General, with respect, your tactics are designed to win battles through overwhelming force. Human tactics are designed to win wars through refusing to lose them. She manipulated the holographic display to show mission recordings from HFY 7. The assembled officers watched Elena's movements through the crashed ship, her navigation of environmental hazards, and her unconventional assault on syndicate forces. Human tactical doctrine is based on adaptation, improvisation, and endurance, Elena explained. When you can't overpower the enemy, you outthink them. When you can't outlast the environment, you work with it instead of against it. When conventional approaches fail, you find unconventional solutions. Vex 9 stepped forward to support Elena's presentation. Commander, I have observed human Elena in multiple combat situations. Her success rate exceeds warriors with 10 times her physical capabilities. The contradiction cannot be explained through standard military analysis. Commander Zek Alpha processed this information through crystalline cognitive structures that struggled with concepts outside established parameters. Are you suggesting that physical weakness can be converted into tactical advantage? Elena nodded as she concluded her presentation. I'm suggesting that every limitation forces adaptation, and adaptation creates capabilities that unlimited power never develops. Humans learned to be unpredictable because predictable meant dead. We learned to be resourceful because wasteful meant extinction. We learned to never quit because quitting meant our species disappeared. The chamber fell silent as alien officers processed concepts that challenged their fundamental understanding of military effectiveness. Elena's fragile human physiology suddenly appeared less like a liability and more like a completely different approach to survival. General Morthak spoke with grudging respect. Captain Vasquez, your methods achieved results that our conventional approaches could not. This suggests that our military doctrine may be incomplete. Elena returned to her undersized chair, aware that she had just participated in a paradigm shift that would influence Galactic Defense Force training for generations. General, human methods aren't better than yours, they're different. Sometimes different is exactly what a situation requires. Commander Zek Alpha's crystalline form pulsed with decision-making frequencies. Squad 7 is hereby commended for exceptional performance under impossible conditions. Furthermore, Captain Vasquez will be assigned to develop new tactical training protocols based on human adaptive strategies. As the debriefing concluded, Elena found herself surrounded by alien officers who wanted to understand how fragility could be transformed into strength. Her supposedly inferior human capabilities had become the foundation for military innovations that would change how the galaxy approached warfare. 6 months after the HFY 7 mission, Elena stood before the largest assembly of warriors in Galactic Defense Force history. The Grand Tactical Center had been converted into an amphitheater where representatives from every member species gathered to witness something unprecedented in military evolution. Elena wore her standard duty uniform, still the lightest and least impressive outfit in a sea of natural armor, mechanical enhancements, and ceremonial weapons. But the attention focused on her had shifted from skepticism to something approaching reverence. Her fragile human frame now commanded respect that had nothing to do with physical intimidation. Commander Zek Alpha's crystalline presence dominated the center stage as he addressed the assembly. The Adaptive Tactics program has produced results that challenge every assumption about combat effectiveness. Captain Vasquez will present the findings that are revolutionizing our approach to impossible missions. Elena approached the presentation platform, aware that her every movement was being analyzed by military theorists from across the galaxy. The holographic displays activated around her, showing mission statistics that told an incredible story of transformation. In the past 6 months, Elena began, mixed species squads using human adaptive tactics have achieved a 97% success rate on missions previously classified as unwinnable. Casualty rates have dropped by 80%. Mission completion times have improved by 60%. General Morthak, whose initial skepticism had transformed into grudging admiration, gestured with his massive armored limbs. Captain, explain how physical weakness translates into tactical superiority. Elena manipulated the holographic displays to show training footage of alien warriors learning human movement techniques. General, it's not about weakness becoming strength. It's about different types of strength serving different purposes. The displays showed Krathari warriors learning to move with precision instead of power. Their natural armor adapted for stealth operations instead of direct assault. Forthak fighters discovered that their forearms could manipulate delicate equipment as effectively as they could wield heavy weapons. Zephyrian scouts found that their camouflage abilities worked even better when combined with human infiltration techniques. Every species brought natural advantages to the program, Elena continued, but they also brought limitations created by relying too heavily on those advantages. Human adaptive methods taught them to use their strengths differently and to develop capabilities they never knew they possessed. Thex9 stepped forward from the audience, his chitinous frame bearing new equipment designed for precision operations rather than heavy combat. Commander, I request permission to provide testimony regarding the program's effectiveness. Elena watched as her former squad mate addressed the assembly with confidence that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Before training with human Elena, my tactical thinking was limited to applications of superior firepower and defensive positioning. I believed that victory required overwhelming the enemy through direct confrontation. Thex9 activated his own holographic displays, showing mission recordings from recent operations where he had employed hybrid human-alien tactics. Human adaptive methods taught me to see battlefield opportunities that my original training had conditioned me to ignore. I learned to use my natural armor for stealth instead of assault, to apply my strength for precision instead of destruction. Graxon joined the presentation, his 4 massive arms now equipped with tools that emphasize dexterity over raw power. The human concept of working with limitations instead of against them has transformed my combat effectiveness. I no longer see my size as requiring brute force tactics. I have learned to use it for strategic positioning and multidimensional problem solving. Veltoth's scales displayed proud green patterns as he addressed the assembly. Human Elena taught us that adaptation is not accommodation of weakness. Adaptation is development of capabilities that fixed strengths cannot achieve. Elena felt a profound satisfaction as she watched her former companions demonstrate how human tactical philosophy had enhanced rather than replaced their natural abilities. The program had never been about making aliens more human. It had been about teaching them to think like humans when circumstances demanded flexibility over strength. Commander Zek Alpha's crystalline form pulsed with decision-making frequencies. The Adaptive Tactics program will be integrated into standard Galactic Defense Force training. All combat specialties will receive instruction in human tactical methodology. Captain Vasquez will be promoted to Director of Adaptive Strategy. Development. The promotion meant recognition that Elena had never expected when she first endured the skepticism of warriors who considered her too fragile for serious combat. But more importantly, it meant that human survival philosophy would become part of galactic military doctrine. As the assembly dispersed, Elena found herself approached by warriors from species she had never encountered before. Each had heard about human tactics and wanted to understand how physical limitations could be transformed into strategic advantages. A warrior from the crystalline, Nexor species addressed her with harmonic vibrations that translated into respectful inquiry. Director Vasquez, my people possess natural energy manipulation abilities that make us nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. How would human adaptive methods enhance capabilities we already consider perfect? Elena smiled as she recognized the same assumption that had once limited her own squadmates. Commander, the question isn't how to enhance your existing capabilities. The question is what capabilities you've never developed because you never needed them. The Nexor warrior's crystalline structure pulsed with intrigued frequencies. Explain this concept. Elena activated a small holographic display that showed tactical scenarios designed to challenge invulnerable forces. Your energy manipulation makes you nearly unbeatable in direct combat. But what happens when victory requires avoiding combat entirely? What happens when the mission demands infiltration instead of confrontation? What happens when success means protecting something too fragile to survive even the safest applications of your power? The warrior's harmonic responses indicated rapid cognitive processing. You suggest that invulnerability creates tactical limitations as surely as vulnerability does. Elena nodded as she concluded her explanation. Every strength becomes a weakness when circumstances change. Human adaptive tactics teach you to recognize when circumstances have changed and to develop capabilities that your natural strengths never required. As Elena left the Grand Tactical Center, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from being dismissed as too fragile for serious combat to becoming the architect of galactic military transformation. Her human physiology remained exactly as vulnerable as it had always been. Her bones were still hollow compared to alien mineral structures. Her skin could still be punctured by weapons that would barely scratch her companions. But the galaxy had learned to see her fragility as something other than weakness. They had learned that limitations could drive innovation, that vulnerability could inspire adaptation, and that the warrior who refused to quit might achieve victories that overwhelming strength could never accomplish. Elena Vasquez, the human warrior once deemed too fragile for combat, had taught the galaxy that sometimes the greatest strength came from learning to be strong in entirely different ways. Her legacy would be measured not in the battles she had won through superior firepower, but in the impossible missions she had completed by refusing to accept that impossible meant unwinnable. The renowned warrior who had been dismissed for her fragility had become the teacher who showed the galaxy that fragility, properly understood, was just another word for the infinite adaptability that made victory possible when victory should have been impossible.